In this video, we're trying now to explore how CVAT works. So in this case, I'm gonna share you what I've learned from the CVAT and how we can integrate some new features in this repository. So let's start now. The easiest way to understand how we can integrate some CVAT is to look at how others have done it. Okay, a good example of this one is something called as the uh, deep extreme cut segmentation. Okay, so if you haven't tried deep extreme cut segmentation in CVAT, I would recommend it now. Try to do it. Okay, so let's start. How did the deep extreme cut in segmentation work? So one way to do it is to look at how it was done. Um, uh, right now, the internet was not really that good, but it's actually here inside. Okay. Um, to be exact, no, let's try. It's actually on the components. CVAT, what it does is that something called the components folder, so that it can try to segregate some plugins, as they say, on in this CVAT. No, this is something that you can, it's optionally that you can do or you can not do. Okay, so one thing that you would notice now is deep extreme cut is inside the. Oh, it's not master, no, it should be developed. One thing that you would notice now is that um, uh, it's I think it's on the here. Okay. What it does is that first thing it would do is you would need a Docker Compose. Okay. Recall that when you're building a CVAT and you want to do some plugin, again, just look at the instruction, no, the installation guide of CVAT. Let's look at it here. Um, you need to do Docker Compose. It uses Docker Compose. So Docker Compose up minus T, right? But if you need to add more plugins, it introduces a very modular perspective, no? So you need to do Docker Compose F, and then you need to add the components. Okay? So one thing that you would notice is that if you have a plugin that you need to add, they need to add a dash f a flag, and then they would add a YAML file that's the same as Docker Compose, but it has a different name. For each plugin, it has a .cuda.yaml, and then if, for example, you want the analytics, it's .analytics. If you want OpenVino, you'd put .openVino. But of course, since this is not a built-in in Docker Compose, you need to put a dash f. Okay, so similarly in deep and extreme cut, in order for you to add it, well, first thing you want to do is this. No, you need to put a dash f included in the installation. Okay, so that's what he did, no, in the integration. But magically, if you try to look at how they did it, again, we're now at docker compose.txtr.yaml, is that this is the only content of the dxtr.yaml. It just adds this argument called a flag, no, in flag, a flag inside the build, wherein you would have a with dxtr. Okay, so this is how CVAT has done a modular perspective in creating a plugins in their applications. Okay, so whenever you're gonna build a Docker, you have again, I have to mention it again. When you are gonna build CVAT, you need to include it as part of the as part of its installation. Okay, and thus you would do docker compose minus f docker compose that yaml minus f docker compose that override that yaml, and then if you want this one, minus f docker compose dot dxtr dot yaml. Okay, that's the idea of their installation. Okay, so after doing that, just to showcase to you how it works, I'm gonna show you how I build the CVAT in the server. It's shown here in my terminal, docker compose minus f and the original docker compose file, and then this one is the override, and this is how the components I need add the analytics, the CUDA, auto segmentation, OpenVino, TF annotation, and so on and so forth. Okay, so um, And now, in order for you to add the what he did, no, in Deep Extreme Cut is simply to add a YAML file, and that the magical part here is that it has no so much empty content. No, it just adds this flag dxtr.yes. Okay, so there goes begs the question, where is it used, no, this flag? Again, we expect now it is inside the main docker file of CVAT. Okay, let's try to look for that with dxtr, and it's here. Okay, so if you look at the docker file, he's mentioning that there. Okay, we're trying to find an argument which has a variable name of with dxtr, so it just creates a. Okay, and then from here on, he would try to check this one. This is creates a variable in the docker. You're declaring a new variable in the environment variable. You're calling the variable as with dxtr, and then you're trying to check the current flag, the current bash variable. No, that's the idea. The current bash variable, wherein does it have what's the content of with dxtr? Okay, you get it? Okay, again, with the org with dxtr, you're trying to say that you're trying to declare a variable. That's the idea, no? That there is a variable, something like this, that that remains inside the bash, no, and then thus this one is you're calling out what's the value of the current with dxtr. So thus we now understand what this means, no. If with dxtr you mention as yes, then thus what you're actually saying here is that this one would have a value of yes. You get it? And then this one, the XTR model there. This is the home directory. This is the same as tilde in Linux. And then, but of course, since you're inside the Docker, this is more of home Django. Okay, this is the directory of inside the container. And then you go to the dxtr directory, and then he would run this command. Okay, if with the xtr is equal to yes. Again, this is a bash language, no, so it follows the bash syntax. So since if it is yes, then I would do this. Again, it's a simple bash command, no. You're creating a directory. Okay, a directory with the xtr. That's just basically what it means. And then curl, you're downloading this zip from the openvino.org, and then you're gonna try to unzip it to the model directory. You're gonna try to download the download directory. That's the meaning of -o. That's the output directory of this download. It would go to this dxtr model there, as you have mentioned here at line 113, and then you're gonna mention it as dxtr. You're gonna name it as dxtr.zip. Okay, and then you're gonna use the 7-zip command to extract it, and then the output would be as this is mentioned as -o. The output directory would be this one, and then you're gonna remove the zip file. Okay, so basically what you've done here is you just extracted it, and that's basically what it does with a deep extreme cut. That's it. Okay, so if you're able to understand this now, please pause this video. If you haven't understand, you can try to replay it, and then if you don't understand, try to ask questions. Okay, so but anyway, so if in case you're able now to understand what this does, basically right now what you would notice is that during building, you're just trying to unextract the model. That's basically it. It's the model. Think about it this way, no. When we talk about OpenVino, is just a model. That you can think of it like a TensorFlow model. It just does nothing. So if you want to run the segmentation model, the DXTR model, the Deep Extreme Cut model, you still have to run it. Okay. But if you're able now to try how Deep Extreme Cut works in the CVAT, you'll be magically seeing that it's already integrated in CVAT. So now there goes the question: how come that this model was able to be integrated with the CVAT? Okay, again, the meaning of this one is just simply extracting the file. It doesn't do anything at all. Okay, so what it does is that you can think of it like a simple model building in your terminal, wherein you still have to run the model. Okay, it's not yet a server double quote. No, it doesn't. It's not yet integrated. It's just a model, a machine learning model that does nothing at all. Okay, so there goes the question. No, so if that is what it does during the integration, what's the point? How come that it is working during when you are trying to run the CVAT? And there goes. We now try to see this folder. If you look at this folder on how they did it, the first thing you would notice is that this is the same as Django. Okay, so again, if you haven't watched Django on how it works, I would recommend that you would try to understand Django first before we move on. And I would recommend the Corey Schaefer YouTube video for you to understand how Django works. It's less than 8 hours to be exact, the whole marathon. It's really simple, no? But if you're now able to understand Django, recall that Django has a framework of model view template. Okay, again, model uh, is the way is a Django again is a framework of web. It's a web framework and it follows the model view template. Okay, when you say a model, it's how we communicate to the database. Okay, view is how we understand the URL. Okay, and then template is how we display dynamically on the screen of this page of a web page. Okay, now basically if you didn't understand that, that's okay, no? So let's try to understand now this folder. The first thing and the easiest way to understand it is this one. Okay, this one is the apps. This apps.py, as mentioned in the Django, this is how we can say this is one of the requirement for you to integrate as an app inside the web. Again, this is like a mini app, no? It's a mini app inside the whole web app, no? Web application. This is the app so that it can be recognized by the whole website, which is the CVAT. Okay, so you would need this one. It's just very clerical. The next thing we want to do now, of course, this one is I understand it. This one, we're just gonna go there later on. URLs.py. Okay, so urls.py is the file that tells you the routing. What is the routing? I'm trying to highlight now the URL, the one you type on the. For example, we're gonna go to google.com. This is what you type on the URL. No, so in this case, what it does, it created three types of URL. No, you have the create URL. This one's the cancel and the check. Okay, what does it do? Well, basically, what it does is really simple. No, when we see this URL pattern, it simply says, okay, recall that since this is already inside the DXTR app, so suppose now that DXTR suppose now that the URL, let's say we're at cvat.com, no? And then in order for you to go to the DXTR, what you've done is to allocate it on DXTR segmentation URI. Okay, if you still don't know, FYI, if you still don't know how you can integrate it with CVAT and how you can create this DXTR segmentation, please ask me question. But it's usually on the main app of the CVAT. No, but let's assume first that you have this DXTR. No, just to continue the message. Suppose that if you want to navigate to the application of DXTR, you would go at DXTR segmentation. Okay? And then from here on, after going to inside the application, the first thing you want to see is you created a create URI, and then you see this one. It's int colon JID. Okay? It's a variable for them to mention what job ID are you talking about, and it's already declared as an integer, and then it's a variable name of JID. So what you're saying here is that when you create here, you can create a 5, it can be a 10, it can be 100. That is a variable. It can change depending on you. Okay? it is you who would configure it. But basically, if you type, let's say, CVAT dxtr segmentation and then create -1, what you're mentioning is that this is the URI for create, and then it has a job ID of 1. Okay, so suppose you make it 150, that's the job ID, that's 150. That's a variable that you're passing on. Okay, you get it? Now, one thing that you would notice is there's also, of course, the cancel. Okay, and then you also have a check. Okay, so next, let's go on, let's move on. So suppose you created create 150. What does it mean? So suppose now, let's try to understand this one. So when we say create in job ID, in JID, what is that? When you press enter, what it does is that um, um, views.create, it goes to views.create. Okay, so just to make it more realistic for you, no, so in case that you don't understand, suppose you try to run the local host, it's something like this. You run the CVAT at localhost 8000, no, and this is the application fold, this is the URI for your application dxtr. Again, just try to make it more clear, and this is create, just to navigate that you want to create, and this is now your JID. Now when you press enter, what you basically say is this. When you press enter, think of it this way, no? Django would understand that you're trying to go navigate to this URI. Okay? And then thus using this urls.py, what you basically mention is that you would now go to views.create. Okay, do you get it? So when thus, if you now click enter this URI, the Django would understand that you're going to this route. You go to this route and you would try to run the views.create. Okay, so again, that's as mentioned earlier, this is the model view template. When we say view, that's how we understand the routing, and that's what you've done, no? You created a route when you press and enter, and then thus it would run this one here, this function here. You get it? So now let's try to understand this one, no? First things first, you would see login required. So it's just basically means that you need to log in for you to access this URI that we've created. And then permission required. Please remember that in CVAT there is like an annotator, and then the job creator, and then the admin. So permission required is a decorator. It's just for you to check if this user has a permission to create this job or not. Okay, you get it? We're checking if this user has an engine.job change permission. That's basically it. Okay, now after doing that, if of course, if in case it has a permission, if it doesn't have permission, of course you cannot run this function, you would have a 404 error. But if you have a permission, the next thing you would do is do this one, fn object getter job dash job ID. Recall that in urls.py, what you've done, suppose again we've typed that example, no, create 150. Again, he tried using the urls.py. Django was able to understand that you're creating a JID, an integer JID, which is a 150, and thus if you try to do fn object getter job comma JID, what he would understand is you're creating this is you're parsing it as 150. Okay? And from there on, and then from here on, let's try to check this one, def create request JID. So from the JIDs, you've typed 150, and therefore you would get this one as 150. Again, request is the same part of the default in Django, and you would try to run this function. That's it. And if you try to read this one, what it basically does, it would create a queue. Okay, so first it would create the get queue, and then he would fetch the job, and then the first thing you do is you would call that function. Okay, so you would find deep string call. Okay. Okay, with that, that's it. That's for our first video. I hope if you don't have questions, let me know. If you have more questions, just let me know.